Hey, all my IFG friends, this is Steve. I want to say, if you like movies like I do, we've started a new podcast called Happy Hour Flicks. You can find it anywhere podcasts are found. It's all about nostalgic movies that we love, and we bring on special guests each episode, and we also have specialty cocktails made for each one, too. So it really is an hour of a good time talking about movies that we love, like Gremlins, Seven, Free Willy. We talk about The Last Starfighter also. I mean, we kind of run the gamut across all the decades and really have a great time. So wanted to invite you to come over and join us at Happy Hour Flicks, anywhere podcasts are found.
This is the
Independent
Filmmakers Guide
from Framework Productions.
Framework
Productions.
This is the Independent Filmmakers Guide mini-episode, and I'm your host, Stephen Pierce. Many filmmakers have spent countless time studying camera, lighting, and story, but when it comes to actually making the project, many artists are completely lost. Estimating a budget, raising and allocating funds, and all the nitty-gritty details surrounding the business of filmmaking are often mysterious and hard to decipher. Today we're joined with an extremely important but rarely talked about position on film, the line producer. Ellyn Vander Wyden has been working for the past 15 years overseeing the production of independent feature films, documentaries, music videos, and commercials. Ellyn, for people who may not know, what does a line producer actually do?
You said it pretty well in, I think, your second or third or fourth sentence there, the nitty gritty of all those small pictures to put together the big picture that nobody thinks of. So on an independent film, which is pretty much what we're speaking about here, right? Going independent.
Yeah, that's mostly independent.
Okay, the line producer wears even more hats than they would on a bigger film. And a line producer, I would say the first and foremost thing that they would do is put together your budget. And that's probably one of the script, I would say script, budget right after that. But along with the budget, they will help put together a schedule with a first assistant director and do a breakdown of a film, casting, hiring your crew, dealing with every department head, excuse me, every single department head sort of in and out, putting the whole picture together to make the picture. So give me a script and I'll start carving out everything and putting the puzzle together to broaden and get your finished product.
When do you think you should enlist a line producer if you're going to be making a film?
I think as soon as that script is ready to go, that's the time to have the conversation. And even before a script is locked, if possible, because a line producer could bring a lot of important information, answers, and questions to a script before it's locked to move on for budgetary, location, casting, all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I assume a lot of that. Yeah, I assume a lot of that conversation is the scale of what's been written.
Exactly.
And saying what's feasible. So how do you approach that? Because I'm sure that many times when you're brought onto a film, there's a budget already locked in. Sometimes
there is, and sometimes there is not. And I actually get that sort of two camps. Someone will come to me and ask for a budget. And I'll say, do you have financing already? And if so, how much? And then we back into a budget. Or some people will come to me and say, I have no idea. I want to end up somewhere between 2 and 3 million. So just do a budget, a realistic budget based with those parameters and see where we land. So we do it that way and then go up or down. But often on smaller independents, we're going to try to do it for X amount of dollars, and I will back into that number if reasonable.
So how do you analyze a script for budgeting?
I will usually start with the length of the script and figure out first and foremost on the budget that we're speaking of, how many days we can allot realistically to shoot it. So that's usually one of the first things I'll do. And then genre, stunts, day versus night, locations, the size of the cast, how many locations, the scope of the script and how big every department needs to be.
So really just every single element. And that's something I don't think people really take into account. Like most times whenever they're writing a script or starting to work on a script is that like the cost of production design overall is there's a lot of things you need. Like if it's set in, on the streets of New York in 2020, yeah, your wardrobe budget is significantly less than if it's 1986 and,
a Western that is, yeah. And are we going to have horses and covered wagons? And yes. So all of those things. So usually I'll read a script once through, or I try to just to read it through to get a broad. And then I go in and with my highlighter and start marking it up.
Have you ever encountered like a script that had too much in it and you have to go say, hey, this is what you can do?
Oh, often. Yes.
How do you approach that? Because I'm sure you're talking to people that are very passionate about their idea, that don't want to kill their darlings.
Yeah, it's sometimes just as black and white as if you want to get this made, this is what you're going to have to do to get it made. And then it's that conversation with a director, mostly a director, sometimes producers as well. What's the most important? What drives the story? And what's the most important part of this that we need to keep, and what can we let go? And I have to say, usually people are pretty good at being adaptable once you sort of give them the hard conversation.
So what is the most cost impact, if you had like boiled it down to things that end up costing the most money, I guess is maybe the way to approach it? Like whenever you see this, you're like, okay, have you thought about this?
Well, if we take out just the number of days and the size of your crew, because those are, your payroll.
Two exponential factors.
Right, exactly. Your payroll and the size of your cast, art and locations probably can be two big budget eaters.
Yeah, for sure. We talk a lot about location being so key in independent filmmaking, and it is in most independent like projects too, commercials as well. Yeah. You get the right location, you just saved lighting, art, and that's really, really key. So is that, are there ways to attack that whenever you're analyzing the script that you help advise people on?
Yes, but right now I am prepping for a very small independent, very small, sort of dipping our feet into this whole not even post, but during this pandemic, right? And trying to find practical locations is somewhat a must because of lots of reasons, not only budget, but time, but the size, we're trying to keep our crew small. If I go back to just locations, trying to find practical locations. Now, if you're going to create a world, if you're doing a sci-fi, you have to create that world anyways, right? So you need to know you're going to have a budget for that. Right.
And time and the crew to be able to do it.
Support it. Correct.
So how did you get into this? How did you get into the film industry in general and specifically becoming basically the parent on set?
I started in photography. I went to school to be a photographer. And so I started producing. I was in a dark room and worked as a photo assistant, worked as a photographer somewhat, and ended up more on the producing end of it. And worked for many years in fashion and editorial and advertising, and stepped away for quite a few years and raised a family. And when I came back, I sort of ended up in film. It's not so different than still photography, right? Your toolkit is a little bit different, but not much.
No, I'd say probably the coordination is probably very similar with dealing with people and logistics of getting things in and out. And
I think that I do have a little bit of a different approach because a lot of line producers are very analytical, but I am also very creative, and I try not to lose that in line producing. But I think if you can look at line producing creatively, opposed to just spreadsheets in black and white and crossing T's and dotting I's, I sometimes have a creative way out of things a little bit more so than I think some other people.
So Do you have, you mentioned stunts a minute ago too. Do you have like a way of analyzing scenes involving stunts and action and how to break that down from a budgetary perspective and execution perspective?
Yeah, for sure. If it's a car scene, breaking it down to is how many cars you're going to need, as including the hero car, the follow car. If you need another car just to support pieces of that car. And then, of course, the whatever equipment that you need to support that as well, and personnel. So, if you're gonna have a car chase, and at the end of the car chase, the car blows up, you're almost including every single department into that, right? So you have art, stunts, sound. Then you have to bring on a pyro department as well, grip, electric. Everything gets brought into that. Really, nobody gets to sit out of that. So it just adds on to every single department.
So it just grows and grows and grows from one decision there.
Yeah, exactly.
How involved is a line producer in the funding of a project in the beginning?
As strictly only the line producer, you're really only involved once the money is there. And once the money's in the bank or going into the bank, that's when you would get involved. As a producer, that's when you are more involved in the actual funding of the movie and getting the money into the bank. But as a line producer, once the money's in the bank, then you're dealing with contracts for the investors. And, working with your accountant to create cost reports for the investors and showing everybody where their money is going to. We'll use in India as an example. I would work closely with my accountant to be able to create cost reports in either the software that you're using for your payroll company or QuickBooks, if nothing else, to sort of have hot costs that go out to, if they're asked for, to go out to EPs and financiers probably on a weekly basis. Pretty much just keeping them abreast of the ongoing cost and forecasting a cash flow, which I will often put together early on before we even start shooting. Right in development, they'll want to see a cash flow, when we need to start spending money, when so much needs to be in the bank. Often they won't want to put all the money in the bank at once. And I think it's just for their own, they feel safer that way. So how much do you need for development through pre-production? Okay, we're gearing up. We're starting shooting on the 1st. That money needs to be now in the bank 2 weeks prior so you can get it to SAG and your payroll department, all for deposits. So building a cash flow as well, all the way through post.
Can you speak a little bit about the different unions that you work with and how you coordinate with them, and any things you've learned across the years that is
You don't really get to coordinate with them. They tell you what to do and you basically have to do what they say, unfortunately. So for instance, if I use SAG for an example, once you know what you're going into a project, you fill out the application, then they ask you for a plethora of paperwork that you get all into them. They check your budget, they check your schedule, they make sure you're compliant to everything that you say you're going to be. And then you basically are given a deposit as well, based on what your payroll for the cast will be. You give them your deposit and you get a production ID and you're ready to go. And then there's reporting along the way. Like every single day that you're shooting, you have to fill out the Exhibit G, which is the timesheet. And at the end of the week, you send in all of your week's timesheets to your representative. And then you have to fill in a couple different reports. If you have actors that, like a Taft-Hartley report, there's a whole plethora of different reports that you have to send in. And then your payroll is all signed off and also sent to SAG. And at the very end of it, when you're all said and done, you send them in your final budget and your cost reports, and they give you your deposit back if they find that you have done everything you said you were going to do. You finished in the right amount of time. All of your actors were paid what they were due paid, including their pension and health, for SAG. And this is pretty much for all of the unions. And then they give you your deposit back. But any wrong little doing, they will try to fine you.
And that comes out of your deposit.
Exactly.
So talk about pension and health for a second, because I think that burns some people on like micro indies if there's a first time working with SAG or first time working with unions in general.
Oh, it's just a standard number. Right now, it's up to 18.5 for SAG, for instance. The IATSE, it's a little different because there's different tiers within IATSE. I have to say SAG is probably the easiest one to...
because it's just a flat rate. Like if you work for $100 a day, you owe $18.50 on top of that $100.
Yes.
That's kind of like the hidden fees of working with unions that people would not be aware of if they had not done it before.
Correct. And that number does go up occasionally. So you have to be aware of that because they don't tell you the number goes out. And if you calculate it for 17.5 and now it's up to 18.5, you just have lost a percentage that you weren't aware of. But besides pension and health, there's also the state and local fringes, right, with your payroll that have to come out. And then often the 10% for their agency. And this is another one that not everybody always knows until they know it, is SAG's day rate is built on an 8-hour day. But an 8-hour day does not work anywhere near a film day. So technically, before you've even started, your number one on the call sheet is most likely working a 12-hour day every day. So before you've even started, you're at 4 hours overtime every day.
Exactly. You have to know that, which is why it's so crucial to either have a line producer or know these numbers yourselves. And the slope is quite slippery.
Yes. Yes, especially with IATSE. They're more difficult because the numbers are not quite as black and white.
I've never done a film with IATSE. I'm actually in IATSE, but I've never produced a film with them. So what is it about them that makes it a little harder? Every
department has sort of different rules. Like there's a death and dismemberment number fee that's for grip and electric and camera, but as a costume designer you don't have to pay that. The different tiers, the keys, the seconds and the thirds all make a different hourly, and those numbers change between the different tiers, starting with tier 1, and now there's even a tier 0, which is just above non-union. So it's just a lot more numbers to keep track of. And it's not easy to find that information anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, the information is not, from my experience, is very hard to find whenever you're trying to budget it.
Like 600 has a little bit different fees, camera, than, like I said, a costume designer would or a wardrobe designer would.
I mean, it's crazy.
And don't even go DGA. I mean, once you get into those numbers too.
Yeah, I did a little look into that as well, and it's really hard to figure out. So, you frequently the ADs you're working with are non-union?
Yes.
So that makes
unless your director is
DGA, and then everybody has to be DGA, right?
Yes. So I've done both, but if I can, I stay away from that because it just eats up so much of your money so quickly.
That's the thing. Whenever you start budgeting out a union job on an indie film, which is usually, for a really I'm going to say well-funded indie film, I think, is like somewhere like you have $1 million to $3 million. But
I'd say 2 to 5.
Right. Well, 2.5 is the sweet spot from like the market research.
Exactly.
But most people I know that, I've encountered that have made first time filmmakers and stuff are somewhere around 750 to 1.2. Mm-hmm. And none of those are union usually because the money.
They could get you at $1 million. They could try to get you in at $1 million. That's depending where you shoot. Because that could be a tier 0.
And a tier 1 starts where?
Tier 1, I think, is 1.5 or 2.
1.2.
All the way to
somewhere in there.
And what is even more confusing is SAG has one rate of tiers and what they call their different contracts. And then the IATSE has a different one. They don't line up.
Right.
So it's even more frustrating and confusing.
Difficult to decipher for sure. I mean, SAG also has it has work incentives, I know, for if you're diversity in casting that can give you an expansion to your budget
with the modified low.
Exactly. So I think before we're talking about different contract types, and each contract type requires more money paid per department, per person, per hour. I think so here's a question. Do the fringe fees to pension and health and that, do they increase per tier, or are those fixed?
On SAG, I think they're fixed all the way across the board. They're fixed. Yeah. Just like your state and federal would be fixed. Yeah.
So back to hidden charges, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well. Like, because up until a few years ago, everyone was able to kind of work on this 1099 structure where everybody was an independent contractor. And I think most filmmakers, when they budget for microfilms and independent films, that's what you're thinking. I have an agreement with this person. They're going to do my film. I'm going to pay them X amount of dollars a day. Just because I'm bad at math, I'm going to say it's $100, even though it wouldn't be $100 most likely. I'm going to pay this person $100 a day to work on this. And I send them a check, send them a 1099 at the end of the year. We're done. That doesn't work anymore in the film industry, at least in my experience, because those are technically employees, depending on what they're doing.
And I think it can still work a little bit. It's getting harder and harder to do that. And you are putting yourself at jeopardy to getting caught.
Absolutely.
If it was a 2-day commercial, you could probably do it, right? If you're going to do a 20-day film, that's more difficult because then you have to have workers' comp too, and you have to get the workers' comp from somewhere.
Yeah. So these are all the things that start adding up and why it's good to have a line producer. Because again, for instance, just to break down how quickly this spirals out of control. Say you have a SAG after, you're paying them $100 a day. That's an 8-hour day. Then you go negotiate it with them, right?
Yeah.
So assuming now they're going to do 12 hours per day. Now you have 4 hours of overtime. Oh boy, here comes math. Time and a half for 4 hours.
Right.
Right. So let me think about this for a second. Hold on. Where's the calculator? Well, you know what? We're not even going to do the math. I can't even do it in my head. I'd have to do a spreadsheet. Maybe you're better at it than I am.
Well, okay, let's do it this way. The old SAG ultra low number was 125. Okay. It's since in the last couple of months gone up to 200. At that 125, really all in, your day rate almost was 240.
Which makes sense because you have federal income tax, you have state income tax, sometimes local tax as well.
Yep. Social
Security, Medicaid.
Yep.
And then you have to match that contribution for those as an employer.
Yep. And then you have your it was 17.5 when that calculation was done for pension and health, the 10% fee to their agency. And then plus a payroll fee.
Exactly. So if you'd budgeted $125 per actor per day, you're missing half your money.
Yeah.
So that's really important to understand and really why it's dangerous not to have a line producer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some big pitfalls other than that young independent filmmakers fall into that you see?
Budgeting and knowing how to budget. Somebody told me this little example one time and it works so perfectly. So I'm going to use this. So the director comes to you and he says, "Oh my God, I have to have a pig in this film. I just love pigs. There's this scene. It'll be great. I want a pig." Okay. So you have to pay for the pig. You have to pay for the pig wrangler. You have to pay to transport the pig there. Then once the pig is on set, where are you going to keep the pig? So you have to build a corral or something, a pig house, right? Then you have to feed the pig. You have to clean up after the pig. And then you have to set the pig off on it when he's done. So there's your pig for the day has turned into all of these other costs that you're not aware of. So that can go down the line. You know, you want to blow up a car. You don't just blow up that car. It's all down the line of what it is. You have to, and plus you have to not only feed the pig, you have to feed the pig wrangler. So you've added additional craft service and another meal to your day.
Absolutely. Something that just occurred to me, you said a minute ago, was SAG's based on an 8-hour day.
Mm-hmm.
So my understanding is now everywhere in the U.S. is still legal as long as you're above minimum wage to work what's called a straight 10. So 10 hours at straight fee before you hit overtime, before you hit time and a half, right?
Right. Correct.
California, that's no longer legal. So if you're filming in California, I believe you're only legally allowed to go to a straight 8. Is that your understanding as well?
I'm not sure about California, but when I do a day, so if I offer somebody again $200 a day, right? Here's $200 a day, but a film day is 12 hours. So it's $200 for a day up to 12 hours. that $200, when you break that down, again, I have a little calculator, it will give me the actual
proper hourly.
Correct, with the 4 hours of overtime, because we still do base it on 8 and 4.
It's important because you have to be clear when you book somebody and make that deal that is the agreement, that you're booking X amount of dollars for X amount of time. Because if you do not make that specific, the assumption could be 8 hours, 10 hours, 14 hours. And that's, in my experience, that makes for a really bad way to set up with a crew.
And I don't think anybody that was going to work in film or TV would assume it was 8 hours, but people could assume it was 10 hours or 12 hours. For often a commercial is often 10 hours, but a feature film is always 12 hours. Although they're trying to get features back down to 10 now. That it's a big push to make the day 10 hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when you fill out their deal memo, you should have on their deal memo actually what their hourly is, so that it's still that, because we work on day rates in the industry mostly, or weeklies. It's still important that they see what that hourly is for payroll, because that's how the payroll company will pay them.
I completely agree. That's something we started doing about 2 years ago. We now work with entertainment partners. Beforehand, we were trying to do all of this by ourselves and trying to do it the right way. Sometimes you make mistakes and you learn. And what we ultimately learned is that you have to boil it down to an hourly rate, because even if you have a day agreement or a weekly agreement, because what happens when you have one 16-hour day?
Yeah.
Because now everybody's clear. If there's been a deal memo with an hourly rate on it, everybody knows what the deal is and what the agreement is. And
so those 4 hours between 12 and 16 are now based on this hourly rate.
Exactly. Precisely. So all that being said, this sounds stupid, but I love getting into the weeds about this kind of stuff, because from personal experience, I've been burned on these things and just had to cough up the money. And that hurts when you're trying to make something artistic and you lose you lose your money to try, extra that you weren't expected to do. That's really painful.
Yeah. And I would also say get a good accountant and someone you trust and you can work with, because I'm a line producer. I'm not an accountant. I can move money around really well, but I'm not the one that's going to figure out your hourly. The accountant is, or the payroll person's going to do that.
The way we always think about it is the producer or line producer is the preventative measure. We do that to predict it and get it correct, or as correct as possible. The accountant is the one that fixes it when it's wrong. Have you ever had an experience with different types of funding, alternative funding, that you've had to account for within budgeting and within the process of the funding of a film, specifically like late equity finishing funds or gap funding or something? Have you ever had to be involved with something like that?
I am, but I'm sort of peripherally involved with it. So I have several producing partners that I work with that, even though I'm a full producer on the project, I sort of take on the role of this line producer. And one producer that I work with, that's his role, is he deals with all the financing. So I hear it all and I'm in tune with it, but I'm not the one making the deals. It's sort of how I feel about post-production too. I know enough about post-production to get me there and to get me through it, but I rely on a post-producer to, supervise that phase of the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, if you ever want to talk about gap financing and tax credit financing and all that things, I have the guy you can talk to.
Well, I'd love to talk to him, honestly. Yeah, because I think gap financing is one of the most terrifying decisions and probably worst decisions an independent filmmaker can make. When you need it, it can be extremely beneficial, but only in certain circumstances, especially whenever you're dealing with like these scope movies that I think we're really targeting.
Yeah.
So how is working on independent feature narrative stuff different than other projects?
There's probably just a lot more layers to it. You usually have a bigger cast. You're in for a longer time. There's more locations. Just more of more layers and more abundance of those key elements that are in the other one. So if you do a commercial, often a commercial is 1, 2, or 3 days, maybe, right?
Right.
And your team is kind of lean. You have a lot more money usually to achieve what you're trying to achieve in those 3 days. And your days are a little bit shorter. Music videos, same things. They're usually one day, probably, maybe 2 days. More money, usually. More money, but leaner time, like leaner crews, most likely. Sometimes your art department is a lot bigger. Your costume can be a lot bigger. I think with a narrative feature, indie, you're trying to shoot anywhere between 18 and 25, maybe 30 days and get a lot packed into those days, 6, 7, 8 pages a day, sometimes trying to get 5, 6, 7, 8 pages a day of a script.
One other thing that just reminded me of that can be a big gotcha for an indie producer is, say you're shooting, you schedule a 20-day production. You also have a 40-hour week. So you're planning on basically your 12-hour days or whatever. Once you go, you can't work. What I'm trying to say is 6 or 7 days in a row impact you in a different way.
6, you don't ever want to, you don't ever want to be a 6-day if you're on payroll, unless sometimes you can get around it by straddling 2 weeks.
Exactly. But you're really playing with fire. If you're working 3 or 4 weeks in a row, you can really get caught out. Like you've got it. So basically, if you're budgeting these things out, you should be structuring 5-day weeks or 4-day weeks, depending on who you have on.
Yes. So I'm actually, like I said, right now gearing up for this very small, ultra low budget, right? That we're going up to the Berkshires to shoot. We're going to do 5 days on, 1 day off, 4 days on, 1 day off. I mean, we're totally to align ourselves with the proper amount of days plus the location, when we can use the locations. We have this, but we're only doing 1 day off. That's how we're trying to keep it lean. We're going 1 day off in between, and we're only shooting 15 days.
The 15-day feature is a real thing.
Yes.
And it is everyone loves it and hates it in equal measure. I think.
You get in and you get out, and just shooting 1 day off in between. I feel like it's the threshold to how far you can get without needing 2 days off.
So here's a question for you. You're shooting, and just hypothetically, you're shooting in upstate New York with a crew mostly based, like the Keys, at least based out of New York City. You travel everybody up. They're putting it up in a hotel. You get to your off day. Are off days non-pay days?
Correct. On this budget, yes, they are. Or
do you work now? Is that not always the case then?
Sometimes on a much bigger, I'd say especially if you're on a weekly, if sometimes on a bigger budget, I would just hire people weekly, especially if you're taking them out of state, right? And then they'd be on a weekly. So
why would you, especially if you're taking them out of state?
Because then I think you're almost getting more bang for your buck then. If you're getting them on a weekly, if you were to go upstate and shoot, you give them the day off, but they're still getting, even if they're working 4 days within that week, you're still getting you're still getting your weekly, but they'll give you a little bit more on.
Just a small amount of wiggle on it.
Yes, exactly. And a little bit of currency with them, so to speak. Hey, I'm getting paid I'm only working 4 days this week, but you're giving me the full week. Yeah, I don't mind going this extra 25 minutes here.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Then
totally.
you need to sort of be able to, on a union thing, you could never do that, right? But
right.
On a small one, you just need to have that little bit of currency and give and take with your crew members.
So, how do you do documentary films? Because I believe the structure on those you can shoot for years.
I would start where you think it should be, and how much based on the length of the film, right? If you want to do a 2-hour feature on light bulbs, and how many interviews you'd like to get. And then on a doc, doc is such a slippery slope, because you might think you only want 4 interviews, but you end up, the inventor of the light bulb, you find out that he actually had a partner that you never knew about. So now you want to interview that person. It's difficult. I'd say more than anything, a doc budget is evolving. It's never a locked budget.
Do you start then with things you can identify and can control in the beginning?
Yeah. Yeah. Like how many interviews you want, how many, are they all in New York, or do you have to travel to, 4 different cities? What your crew is your shooter also going to be your gaffer, and it's just going to be a shooter and a sound man, or do you need a field producer in based on where you're going and what you're interviewing? Are you going to be on a stage, or are you going to go visit this artist in his artist loft? It all, it's breaking down the treatment, because you're not necessarily going to have a script, but you're going to need a treatment for a doc, or some sort of synopsis or some sort of pitch, and breaking that down, and probably working really as a producer very closely with the director if you're not the producer and the director yourself.
So let's talk about another aspect that happens a lot in independent films, is the 1 star coming in for a day or 2 stars. Maybe you get somebody for the whole time that's a little younger but has a little bit of a name. What are some surprises and things that filmmakers may not think about whenever you pay that money to get that person attached in the first place?
What they need to support that, like who are they? Do they need to bring their assistant with them? Do they need to have a certain level of a hotel room? Will they ride in a minivan with somebody else, or will they only be in their own minivan?
I've heard a lot of times that talent will request or require a teamster to drive them specifically because if they've had a long day, they don't want the PA driving them back to the hotel.
Agreed. Yes, absolutely. And depending where the hotel is, absolutely. And down to their food and all those silly stories you hear about. I literally had an actor that would only drink spring water. So you couldn't hand him a bottle of bottled water that was anything but spring water. It couldn't be purified water. It couldn't be alkaline water. It had to be spring water. So those things are all true.
So that is, have you encountered anything that swayed a budget because of the talent unexpectedly, like writers or requests that came in that was like, oh man, well, this was unexpected?
Swayed the budget? No, because I usually put a slush fund in there. Literally, I put a line in my budget based on my overall budget. I do put I call it a star cost line in there. And everyone's like, what's this line? I'm like, I'm keeping it there just because.
That's so for Starbucks coffee and a surprise trailer. I
have a slush fund based on the overall budget. I'm not going to put a $15,000 line in there for a $500,000 film. It just doesn't it has to stay in line with the budget. But I do put that in.
So whenever you get to the ending stages of a production, like you're in, it's an 18-day production, you're in day 14.
Mm-hmm.
And things are running short or have, something's happened, though it's snowing and you're going to lose a day. How do you start allocating and dissecting and triaging to really execute what you have left? Or do you ever sometimes have to say, hey, if you want that, we need this much more money?
Both of those things. And I don't even do it 14 days into I do it at lunchtime every day. I get with the AD first and then with the director if need be and say, okay, we're halfway through our day and we've only gotten half of our schedule done. How are we going to finish this day? What's most important? So I even do it every day. I check it in. And if we're going to move something to the next day, all right, we're going to move it to the next day, but then it's going to affect the next day.
Right. We have a call at this location at 10 a.m. Now it's going to be 2 p.m., but they have a 5 o'clock out.
Exactly. So I think it's working with the AD really a lot. And then going to the director and saying, this is what's happening. You can have this or this. What's most important? We can give you a little bit of this and a lot of that, or none of this and all of that, sort of like that, and making deals, so to speak.
So you also produce as well, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Talk about the trajectory of how you've moved into producing and how line production background affects you as a producer.
I think what makes me a better line producer and a better producer is I have a more creative, I can look at things both logistically and creatively. I never really thought I was going to be a line producer. I just sort of fell into it. And I think it's because I can look at things in those two ways. So line producing, I sort of fell into.
So it's something you were good at.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I actually I do a lot of I'll do locations as well. I'll location manage and location scout, which I really like. I started in art. I did a lot of art department when I was younger. So I think that's important too, knowing more about every single department, what it takes to go into something. I think as a line producer and as a producer, and I have friends that are producers that were never a PA or never worked in wardrobe at all, or really knows nothing about it, or doesn't know what goes into camera. I think knowing a little bit about all of the departments is really important and what it takes for those departments to do their job successfully.
Is there any advice you can have for independent filmmakers, like on how to structure, like what's the best collaborative nature to try and make something as difficult as this? Is there any tips or times you've seen it and be like, this is really the best way to set it up?
I mean, one thing I think is backing into a number. If you know you have $10 to do something, don't try to budget it for 15. Expectations. And that's one of my mantras. And my other one is like, rates have to stay in line with a budget. So I may have a sound mixer that I love to work with, and he may do a $500,000 movie with me and not make such a great rate over 25 days. But on the next Coke commercial, I'm going to pay him really well for 3 days of his time. Or on the next 2.5, he's going to make a better rate. So just because someone comes and says, oh, my rate is $1,500 a day, that's great if the budget will support your rate, but then you can't work. If you want to work on this project, your rate is not $1,500 a day. Your rate is $500 a day.
Right. And that's just a negotiation constantly.
Yeah. But don't I really want to do your project, but my rate is $1,500 a day. Well, I'd really love to have you, but I can't afford to pay you that for this project. So I'd rather have someone say, thanks, but no thanks, catch me on the next one, than agree to do the project for $500 a day and complain the whole time.
Right, exactly. Because I mean, that gets toxic
and
on
happens.
A creative environment.
Yes,
for sure.
Yes.
So, Ellyn, where can people find your work and anything, any of your work coming up?
I actually, like I was just saying, I have a documentary airing on HBO on July the 29th.
Oh, great. Can you tell us the name of it?
Yeah, it's called The Weight of Gold. It's a documentary about Olympians and mental health. And it's executive produced by Michael Phelps. We have Michael Phelps, Shaun White, Apollo Ono, Bodie Miller, lots of great Olympians bearing their soul. And it's going to be pretty good. And we had to totally pivot with the pandemic, and things changed drastically than the way they were supposed to. We were supposed to have more shooting going on, and we couldn't. So we had to get creative, and the Olympics were canceled. It was supposed to air with the Olympics. So that's another part about being a producer, is pivoting with challenges. We're making things happen we were supposed to do it this way, but we can't do it this way anymore. So how are we going to do it?
Right.
I mean, I have a lot of things out there on Amazon and, streamers and all that good stuff. Yeah.
And people go to your website to keep up with what you're up to?
Yes, which is just my name, ellynvanderwyden.com.
Well, Ellyn, it was great talking to you. Thanks for getting into the weeds on some budget stuff with me.
Absolutely.
Filmmaking is a collaborative experience, and so is this podcast. Follow us on Instagram at framework_productions for upcoming episode announcements, and leave your questions in the comments for our future guests. The first 10 to comment are immediately entered to win a monthly prize. Please take a second to subscribe so you know about future episodes, and leave a review. It really does help us. For more information about today's guest, visit independentfilmmakersguide.com to see visuals, diagrams, and to see links to the episode in video and article form. IFG is a community, and we want to help you in your filmmaking process.
Hi, I'm Paul Ellison. I'm a film editor from Dallas, Texas, and I'm reading the credits. IFG is produced by Framework Productions and directed by James Allerdyce. It's produced by Matt Mundy, edited by Audrey Rae McHale, and hosted by Stephen Pierce. The music is by Glass Boy. Find his music on freemusicarchive.org. Thanks for listening.
Hey friends, we just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about two personal things. First, we wanted to thank you, our listening community, and our wonderful guests, learning so much together along the way and continuing to learn, sharing our stories, making a lot of new friends, and collaborating, which is exactly what this is all about. Which also brings me to my second point. In great part to many of these new relationships, we wanted to let you know that we've taken a lot of this advice ourselves and made our own narrative feature film, Herd, H-E-R-D, Herd, which is premiering this October on Friday the 13th in select theaters as well as on VOD. Personally, I think it's the perfect kind of scary movie to watch during our favorite scary season. So we'd love for you to celebrate with us and watch Herd. You can pre-order it on Apple TV and, of course, do the communal thing, see it in theaters. Of course, for all of this, please see our show notes, but basically, we're going to keep it all updated at herd.film. That's HERD.FILM, herd.film as well. Thank you again, and be sure to give us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts so we can continue to build this community and collaborate. IFG, how movies get made.